In a Chicago courtroom where power and money always won, a young waitress stood alone against the city's most dangerous mafia boss. He laughed when she couldn't afford legal representation. But when Judge Catherine Morrison removed her robe and walked to the defendant's table, the entire room fell silent. What happened next would shatter everything Dominic Caruso had built. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dominic Caruso's penthouse office on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower, each droplet catching the neon glow of Chicago's Loop District below. The city sprawled beneath him like a kingdom he had spent 20 years conquering, block by blood-soaked block. He stood at the glass, one hand in the pocket of his custom Brioni suit, the other holding a tumbler of 18-year-old Macallan, watching the headlights blur into ribbons of gold and red on rain-slicked Michigan Avenue. Behind him, Marco Bellucci shifted his weight from foot to foot, the old leather of his shoulder holster creaking in the silence. Marco had been with Dominic since the beginning, since they were teenagers running numbers for the Giordano family in Little Italy. Now Marco was his underboss, his right hand, the only man Dominic trusted to stand at his back. "The shipment from Newark cleared customs," Marco said, his voice rough as gravel, "clean as Sunday morning. Our guy at the port came through." Dominic took a slow sip of scotch, feeling the burn slide down his throat. "Good. What about the Kowalski problem?" "Handled. He won't be testifying." The words hung in the air like smoke. Dominic didn't ask how. He never asked how. That was the invisible line that separated the king from the executioner, the line that let him sleep at night in his 8,000-square-foot penthouse while bodies went cold in the Chicago River. He had learned long ago that power required distance, that mercy was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. But lately, something had been shifting inside him, a hairline crack in the foundation he'd spent decades building. It had started 3 months ago, on a Tuesday night in November. He'd been leaving Rossetti's, his flagship restaurant in River North, when he saw her. A young woman, mid-20s maybe, with auburn hair pulled into a messy ponytail, struggling to carry 3 stacked boxes out the service entrance. She wore the black pants and white shirt of the waitstaff, and even from across the alley, he could see the exhaustion carved into her face. One of the boxes had slipped, and she'd lunged to catch it, dropping the other 2. Files and papers exploded across the wet pavement, and she'd fallen to her knees in a puddle, scrambling to gather them, her hands shaking. Dominic had started to walk past. He had a meeting with the Giordanos, couldn't be late, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller. Maybe it was the quiet sob that escaped her throat when she thought no one was watching. He'd crouched beside her, his $5,000 shoes soaking in the gutter water, and helped her collect the scattered papers. Up close, he saw that they were legal documents, notices from a law firm, words like eviction and foreclosure, stamped in angry red ink. "Thank you," she'd whispered, not meeting his eyes. Her voice was soft, almost musical, with a slight southern lilt that didn't belong in Chicago. "I'm sorry, I'm such a mess." "What's your name?" he'd asked. "Emma." She'd finally looked up, and her eyes were the color of the lake at dawn, gray-green and full of storms. "Emma Sinclair. You work here?" "Day shift, 5 days a week. Night classes at Roosevelt University the other 3. And I clean offices on weekends." She'd laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Living the dream. Something in her had reminded him of his sister, Elena, before the cancer took her. That same fierce determination wrapped around a fragile core, that refusal to break even when the world was grinding her down. He'd handed her the last of the papers and stood, extending his hand to help her up. Her palm was small and cold against his, and for a moment, they just stood there in the rain, strangers connected by something neither could name. "Mr. Caruso," Marco had called from the car, impatient. "We're gonna be late." Emma's eyes had widened when she heard the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the Caruso name, knew what it meant. She'd pulled her hand back like she'd touched fire, gathering her boxes with trembling fingers. "I should go," she'd said quickly. "Thank you again." He'd watched her disappear into the restaurant, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. It was the first time in 15 years he'd thought about someone else's problems, instead of his own empire. Now, standing in his office with the rain still falling and Marco waiting for orders, Dominic rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the memory. Sentiment was weakness. Attachment was death. These were the rules he'd lived by, the code that had kept him alive and wealthy and powerful. "Boss?" Marco prompted. "You good?" "Fine. Tell Chen we'll take the meeting Thursday. Upstairs at Rossetti's, not the back room. I want him to feel comfortable." "You think he's going to agree to the partnership?" "He will. He's smart enough to know that fighting us costs more than joining us." Dominic finished his scotch and set the glass on his desk, a slab of black walnut that had cost more than most people's cars. "What else?" "There's a thing tomorrow. Court thing. That girl from the restaurant, the one you helped that night, Emma something. She's being sued by Prestige Properties. You know, the company we have the arrangement with." Dominic's hand froze halfway to his jacket pocket. "What kind of case? Eviction, unpaid rent, breach of contract, the usual. But get this. Prestige is represented by Nathaniel Wade." Marco's lip curled. "That snake you pay to make our problems disappear. Apparently he does private practice too, shaking down college girls who can't make rent." The crack in Dominic's foundation widened. Wade was on his payroll, had been for 7 years. The lawyer was brilliant and ruthless, exactly the kind of man Dominic needed to navigate the gray zones between legal and lethal. But the thought of Wade in a courtroom, using that razor blade mind to destroy someone like Emma, someone who worked 3 jobs just to survive, made something hot and ugly coil in his stomach. "She have representation?" Dominic asked, keeping his voice casual. "Are you kidding? Girl can barely afford groceries. She'll be representing herself. Wade's gonna eat her alive, and Prestige will have her evicted by end of week." Marco paused, studying Dominic's face. "Why do you care?" That was the question, wasn't it? Why did he care? He'd built an empire on not caring, on making decisions based on profit and power, not sentiment. Emma Sinclair was nobody to him, just another face in a city of millions, another casualty of a system that chewed up the weak and spit them out. But he remembered her eyes in the rain, the way she'd said living the dream like it was a curse and a prayer at the same time, the legal documents with red stamps that marked the end of whatever dreams she'd come to Chicago to chase. "I don't," Dominic lied. "But Wade works for me. I should know what he's doing in his spare time." Marco didn't look convinced, but he knew better than to push. "Court's at 9 a.m. Judge Morrison presiding. You want me to send someone?" "No." The word came out sharper than Dominic intended. He softened it with a shrug. "I'll handle it myself. Need to have a conversation with Wade anyway about the Kowalski situation." It was another lie, but Marco accepted it with a nod and left the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Dominic stood alone in the rain-streaked darkness, looking out at his kingdom and wondering when he'd become the kind of man who lied to his oldest friend about why he was going to a courtroom to watch a waitress fight for her life. The rain kept falling, and somewhere in the city below, Emma Sinclair was probably sitting in a too-small apartment, trying to figure out how to defend herself against a lawyer who'd forgotten what mercy meant. And Dominic Caruso, who'd built his empire on ruthlessness, was planning to walk into a courtroom for the first time in a decade. He didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost him everything he'd spent 20 years building. And by the time he understood the price, it would be too late to walk away. Outside, thunder rolled across Lake Michigan, and the rain fell harder. The Cook County Courthouse smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation, a combination Dominic hadn't experienced since his own trial 15 years ago. That time, he'd walked out acquitted, thanks to Wade's brilliant defense, and a jury that had been strategically convinced to see reasonable doubt in mountains of evidence. Now he sat in the back row of courtroom 4C, a gray November morning pressing against the tall windows, watching Emma Sinclair sit alone at the defendant's table. She wore a navy blue dress that had probably come from a discount store, her hair pulled back in a neat bun that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion bruised beneath her eyes. A single manila folder sat in front of her, thin and inadequate against the 3 leather briefcases Nathaniel Wade had arranged at the plaintiff's table with military precision. Wade himself looked like he'd stepped out of a Brooks Brothers catalog. Steel gray suit, burgundy tie, shoes polished to a mirror shine. His silver hair was swept back from a face that managed to be handsome and reptilian at the same time. He was reviewing notes on an iPad, occasionally murmuring to the representative from Prestige Properties, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s named Victoria Chen. Dominic had called Victoria personally last night, suggested it might be in everyone's best interest to settle this case quietly. She'd laughed, actually laughed, and told him that Prestige Properties didn't negotiate with deadbeats. and if he had a problem with their business practices, perhaps he should reconsider their arrangement. It was the first time in 10 years someone had hung up on Dominic Caruso. The novelty of it had almost been amusing. Almost. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the handful of people in the courtroom stood as Judge Catherine Morrison entered from her chambers. Morrison was a legend in Chicago legal circles, 62 years old, African-American, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that could reduce arrogant lawyers to stammering children. She'd started as a public defender in the South Side, worked her way up through sheer brilliance and an iron will that refused to bend to political pressure. Dominic had never met her personally, but he knew her reputation: fair, fierce, and impossible to buy. She settled into her chair, surveying the courtroom with the expression of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human foolishness and was unimpressed by all of it. Case number 2024 CV 28834, Prestige Properties LLC versus Emma Rose Sinclair, eviction and breach of contract. The judge looked down at her notes, then at Emma. "Ms. Sinclair, I see you're appearing pro SC. Is that correct?" Emma stood, and Dominic could see her hands trembling. "Yes, Your Honor. I couldn't afford. That is, I'm representing myself." From the plaintiff's table, Wade's laugh was soft but deliberately audible, designed to cut. "Your Honor, if we could proceed. I have 3 additional cases this morning, and I don't think this needs to take very long." Morrison's gaze shifted to Wade, and the temperature in the courtroom dropped 10 degrees. "Mr. Wade, in my courtroom, we will take exactly as long as justice requires. Your schedule is your problem, not mine. Is that clear?" "Of course, Your Honor." Wade's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Irritation, maybe, or wounded pride. "Ms. Sinclair, please tell me why you believe this eviction is unjustified." Emma pulled a piece of paper from her folder with shaking hands. "Your Honor, I have receipts showing I paid my rent every month for the past 2 years. I was never late until August, when my mother got sick, and I had to send money home to Tennessee for her medical bills. I told the property manager, Mr. Reynolds, that I would catch up by October, and he said it would be fine. But then in September they raised my rent by $600. "Objection," Wade interrupted smoothly. "Your Honor, the lease agreement clearly stipulates that rent can be adjusted with 60 days' notice, which was provided. Ms. Sinclair's personal circumstances, while unfortunate, don't constitute grounds for breach of contract." "I'll allow Ms. Sinclair to continue," Morrison said. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Wade." Emma took a shaky breath. The rent increase made it impossible to catch up. "I'm working 3 jobs, Your Honor. I barely sleep. I'm not trying to avoid paying. I just need time. But last month, they put a notice on my door saying I had to be out in 14 days. And when I tried to talk to Mr. Reynolds, he said the company had decided to pursue eviction because I was—" her voice cracked, "because I was the kind of tenant that lowered property values." The courtroom was silent except for the rain that had started again, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Dominic watched Emma's shoulders curve inward, that same posture from the night in the alley, like she was trying to disappear. Wade stood, radiating confidence and barely concealed contempt. "Your Honor, Prestige Properties has been more than generous with Ms. Sinclair. The fact is, she signed a legally binding contract and failed to meet its terms." Her sob story about medical bills and multiple jobs is irrelevant to the law. We're not a charity. We're a business. And if Ms. Sinclair thought she couldn't afford to live in Chicago, perhaps she should have considered that before signing a lease. "She can't afford a lawyer," Wade added with a theatrical gesture toward Emma. He was playing to an invisible audience, his voice dripping with mockery. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Victoria Chen smiled. And then Wade laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. That was when something inside Dominic shattered. He'd heard that laugh before, had maybe even laughed like that himself, back when he was younger and hungry, and convinced that weakness deserved to be crushed. But hearing it now, directed at Emma, at someone who worked herself to exhaustion just to survive, it was like looking in a mirror, and finally seeing the monster everyone else had seen all along. He started to stand, wasn't even sure what he was planning to do, but Judge Morrison moved first. She set down her pen very deliberately, the small sound somehow louder than Wade's laugh. Then she stood, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "Mr. Wade," she said quietly, "in my 38 years in law, I have seen many talented attorneys. I have also seen many attorneys who forgot why we have a legal system in the first place. She began unbuttoning her robe, and Wade's confident smile faltered. "We don't have courts to protect the powerful from the weak, Mr. Wade. We have them to ensure everyone, regardless of wealth, has access to justice." The robe came off. Judge Morrison folded it carefully and handed it to her bailiff, who looked as stunned as everyone else in the room. "Your Honor, what are you—" Wade began, but Morrison silenced him with a raised hand. "I am temporarily recusing myself from this case." She walked down from the bench, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and moved to stand beside Emma at the defendant's table. "Ms. Sinclair, I am offering to serve as your legal counsel for this proceeding. Do you accept?" The courtroom exploded into whispers. Victoria Chen's face flushed red. Wade looked like he'd been slapped. Emma stared up at the judge, tears streaming down her face. I can't pay you, Your Honor. I don't recall asking for payment." Morrison's voice was gentle now, almost motherly. "Do you accept?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "Yes, thank you." Morrison turned to face Wade, and now she was no longer a judge but an opponent, and the transformation was terrifying. "Your Honor, I mean Ms. Morrison," Wade stammered. "This is highly irregular. I'd like to request a continuance to consult with my client about—" "Denied. You wanted to proceed quickly, Mr. Wade. Let's proceed." Morrison pulled out the chair next to Emma and sat down, already flipping through the thin manila folder. "Now then, I believe you were arguing about the legality of a 60-day notice for rent increase." From his seat in the back, Dominic watched the entire dynamic shift. Wade's confidence evaporated like rain on hot pavement. Victoria Chen was whispering urgently into her phone. And Emma was looking at Judge Morrison like she'd just witnessed a miracle. Maybe she had. The hearing lasted another 90 minutes, and it was a masterclass in legal warfare. Morrison dismantled Wade's arguments with surgical precision, pointing out inconsistencies in the lease agreement, irregularities in the eviction notice, and evidence of discriminatory practices in Prestige Properties' tenant selection process. She called witnesses from her phone, other tenants who'd been evicted under similar circumstances, and forced Wade to admit that the rent increases targeted specific demographics. By the time it was over, Wade was sweating through his expensive suit. Victoria Chen had left the courtroom twice to make angry phone calls, and Emma was gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Based on the evidence presented," Morrison said, standing once more, "I'm recommending this case be dismissed with prejudice, and that Prestige Properties face investigation for housing discrimination. The court will assign a judge tomorrow to make the final ruling, but I'm confident in my assessment." She looked at Wade. "Mr. Wade, I suggest you counsel your client to settle this matter immediately, and pray Ms. Sinclair doesn't file a countersuit." Wade gathered his briefcases without another word, his face ashen. Victoria Chen followed him out, her phone already pressed to her ear, and then it was just Emma and Morrison in the courtroom, with Dominic watching from the shadows. "Thank you," Emma sobbed, and Morrison pulled her into a hug that was decidedly unjudge-like. "You're stronger than you think, honey," Morrison said softly. "Don't let people like Wade convince you otherwise." As they separated and Emma gathered her things, Dominic slipped out of the courtroom before she could see him. But he didn't leave the courthouse. Instead, he found Wade in the hallway, talking urgently on his phone. When Wade saw Dominic approaching, the color drained from his face. "I'll call you back," Wade said quickly, ending the call. "Dominic, listen. I had no idea you're done working for me," Dominic said quietly. "Send your final invoice. We're finished." "What? Because of some eviction case? Come on, she's nobody." Dominic stepped closer, and Wade stumbled backward. "She's nobody to you. To me?" He paused, something dangerous glinting in his eyes. "She's the person you just taught me I never want to become." He walked away, leaving Wade stammering in the hallway, and pushed through the courthouse doors into the rain. It soaked through his suit in seconds, cold and cleansing, and Dominic tilted his face to the sky, feeling something he hadn't felt in 20 years, shame, and beneath it, something even more terrifying, the beginning of change. The Rossetti's dining room after hours was Dominic's confessional, though God had stopped listening to him long ago. He sat alone at his usual corner table, a bottle of Barolo breathing between two crystal glasses, watching the kitchen staff finish their closing duties through the service window. The restaurant had been his first legitimate business, purchased 15 years ago with money that was mostly clean, transformed into the kind of upscale Italian place where aldermen and CEOs came to be seen. Now it was worth $12 million, part of an empire that sprawled across Chicago like roots beneath the city. Marco appeared from the office, his expression dark as a February sky. He dropped a manila envelope on the table and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "You want to tell me what the hell happened today?" Marco's voice was low, controlled. That was how Dominic knew he was truly angry. Marco only got quiet when he wanted to hit something. "I fired Wade." "Yeah, I heard." "Want to explain why you torched a 7-year relationship with our best lawyer because of some eviction case?" Marco poured himself wine without asking, drained half the glass in one swallow. "You got people asking questions, Dom. People wondering if you're going soft." Dominic had expected this conversation. What he hadn't expected was how little he cared about the answers he should give. The careful explanations that would reassure Marco and the others that he was still the same ruthless leader who'd built their organization from nothing. Wade was laughing at her, Dominic said instead. In court. At a woman who works 3 jobs just to keep a roof over her head, who sent her rent money to her dying mother in Tennessee. He laughed because she couldn't afford representation. "So what? That's what lawyers do. They win. That's why we pay them." Marco leaned forward. "This is about the girl from the alley, isn't it? Emma, whatever her name is." "Sinclair. Emma Sinclair." "Right. The one you helped pick up papers in the rain, like some kind of knight in shining armor." Marco's tone was cutting. "Dom, listen to yourself. You're talking about firing our lawyer and derailing business relationships because you feel sorry for some college girl. This isn't who you are. Maybe it should be." The words surprised Dominic as much as they surprised Marco. He poured himself wine, buying time to understand what he was actually trying to say. "When did we become the bad guys, Marco? When did we start being okay with people like Wade using our money to destroy people like Emma?" "We became the bad guys the first time we broke someone's legs for being late on a payment. We became the bad guys when we started moving product that killed kids in Pilsen. We became the bad guys when we decided profit was more important than—" Marco stopped, closed his eyes. "Jesus, Dom. You can't get religion now. Not after everything we've done." The envelope sat between them like evidence. Dominic opened it, found photographs inside, surveillance shots of Emma leaving Roosevelt University, entering her apartment building, working a shift at Rossetti's. There were also documents, background check, financial records, family history. "Who ordered this?" Dominic's voice was ice. "Tony Giordano. He heard you were interested in the girl, wanted to know why, wanted to make sure she wasn't FBI, wasn't building a case." Marco gestured at the photos. "She's clean. Working-class kid from Nashville, came to Chicago for school. Parents are both dead now. The mother died 3 weeks ago, by the way. Emma couldn't afford to go home for the funeral because she was fighting the eviction." Something twisted in Dominic's chest. Emma had been sitting across from Wade, defending herself, while her mother was being buried 800 miles away, and Wade had laughed at her. "Tony also wanted me to tell you that Victoria Chen is furious," Marco continued. "Prestige Properties is talking about ending our arrangement. That's $3 million a year in revenue we use to wash money from the docks. If they pull out, we have to find a new partner, renegotiate terms. It's a headache we don't need. Then let them pull out." "Are you out of your mind?" Dominic met Marco's eyes across the table. "We have 14 other revenue streams. We'll survive without Prestige. What we won't survive is becoming the kind of organization that sides with people like Victoria Chen and Wade against people like Emma." "People like Emma?" Marco laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean innocent people? Normal people? Dom, we prey on people like Emma. That's the business we're in. You can't suddenly decide you don't like it anymore just because you picked up some girl's papers in the rain and felt something." But that wasn't it, and Dominic knew it. The feeling that had started that night in November, the hairline crack, it wasn't about Emma specifically. It was about what she represented. All the people crushed beneath the machine he'd helped build. All the victims whose names he never learned. All the consequences he never had to face because money and power had insulated him from the human cost of his empire. "I watched Judge Morrison take off her robe today," Dominic said quietly. "She walked away from the bench, from her entire career potentially, just to help someone who needed it. When's the last time either of us did something like that? When's the last time we sacrificed anything for anyone except ourselves? Elena," the name dropped like a stone into still water. "You walked away from a $5 million deal to be with her when she was dying. You paid for every treatment, every experimental therapy, bankrupted yourself trying to save her. So don't tell me you've never sacrificed for anyone, because I was there. I watched you destroy yourself trying to save your sister." Marco was right. Dominic had spent 3 years fighting Elena's cancer, throwing money at the best doctors, the newest treatments, anything that might buy her another month, another week. And when she died anyway, the grief had turned him into something harder, colder. He'd rebuilt his empire with a vengeance, convinced himself that the only way to survive was to stop caring about anyone except his own people. But Elena wouldn't have wanted that. The sister who'd raised him after their parents died, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep him in school, who'd believed he could be better than the streets. She would have hated what he'd become. "The Giordanos want a meeting," Marco said after a long silence. "Friday night. They want to talk about Wade, about prestige, about your headspace. Tony's concerned you're becoming a liability." The Giordano family had been Dominic's partners for 15 years, an alliance built on mutual profit and respect. But in their world, respect was transactional. The moment you stopped being useful, you became expendable. "Tell Tony I'll be there." Dominic finished his wine and stood. "And Marco, stop having Emma followed. Whatever Tony's concerns are, she's not part of it." He left Marco sitting in the empty restaurant and walked out into the Chicago night. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the neon and streetlights in smeared colors. His car was parked around the corner, but Dominic walked past it, needing the cold air, needing to think. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "They're going to kill her if you don't back off." Dominic's blood went cold. He immediately called Marco. "Did you just text me?" "No, why?" "Someone sent me a threat. About Emma." Dominic was already running back to his car. "How many people did Tony have watching her?" "Just surveillance, Dom. Nobody was supposed to make contact." Marco swore. "Where are you?" "Heading to her apartment. Send backup now." He broke every traffic law getting to Emma's building in Lakeview, a tired 4-story walk-up squeezed between a laundromat and a corner store. The front door was propped open with a brick, the lock broken. Dominic took the stairs 3 at a time, his hand inside his jacket, gripping the Glock he'd carried for 20 years and never wanted to use. Emma's apartment was on the 3rd floor, door ajar, lights off. He pushed it open slowly, gun raised, clearing corners like he'd been trained to do when he was younger and stupider. "Emma?" A sound from the bedroom, glass breaking. Dominic moved fast, burst through the door, and found Emma pressed against the window, a man in a black jacket gripping her arm. The window was open, cold air pouring in from the fire escape. The man turned, saw Dominic, and made his choice. He shoved Emma hard toward the open window and ran for the door. Dominic had a split second to decide: chase him or save her. He chose Emma. He dropped his gun and lunged forward, catching her wrist as she tumbled backward toward the 3-story drop. Her weight yanked him forward, his ribs slamming into the windowsill, but he held on, pulling her back into the room. They collapsed together on the floor, both breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" Dominic demanded, checking her for injuries. There was a bruise forming on her arm, but otherwise she seemed okay. "Who are you?" Emma was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Why is this happening?" And that was the question Dominic had been avoiding since November. Why had he helped her in the alley? Why had he gone to her court hearing? Why had he fired Wade and alienated partners and put her in danger by showing interest in someone outside his world? Because Emma Sinclair reminded him that he used to be human. Because she worked 3 jobs and sent money to her dying mother and fought in court even when everyone was laughing at her. Because in a city full of people who would step over bodies to get ahead, she was still trying to do things the right way. Because maybe, just maybe, saving her could start to balance the scales of everything he'd destroyed. "My name is Dominic Caruso," he said, helping her to her feet. "And I'm the reason you're in danger. So now I'm going to make sure you're safe." Emma stared at him, recognition dawning. "You were at the courthouse today. I saw you leaving." "Yeah, you're that Caruso. She stopped, but he could fill in the blank. "The mobster, the criminal, the monster." "Yeah," he said again. "And someone just tried to throw you out a window because they think I care what happens to you. Do you?" The question was barely a whisper. Dominic looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his sister in her eyes, saw every person he'd ever hurt or failed to protect, saw the chance for something like redemption. "Yeah," he said for the 3rd time. "I do." Outside, sirens wailed, and Marco's voice called from the stairwell. The moment was breaking apart, reality crashing back in. But for just a second, standing in Emma Sinclair's broken apartment, with the cold wind blowing through the open window, Dominic felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Hope. And the terror of knowing he was about to lose everything for it. The safe house was a 3-bedroom ranch in Oak Park, one of Dominic's properties that existed only on paper, buried under shell companies and false names. Emma sat on the worn leather couch in the living room, wrapped in a blanket Marco had grabbed from the linen closet, while Dominic made coffee in the kitchen that nobody ever used. Through the doorway, he could hear Marco on the phone in the backyard, his voice sharp with anger. It was 4 a.m. Emma's apartment had been processed by Dominic's people, not the cops, never the cops, and scrubbed of any evidence. The man who'd tried to kill her was in the wind, but Marco's contacts were searching. They'd find him. In Dominic's world, people didn't just disappear unless you had more power than the Caruso family, and not many did. Dominic brought 2 mugs into the living room and handed one to Emma. She took it with trembling hands, and he noticed the bruise on her arm had darkened to deep purple. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the coffee, and for—" her voice broke, "for saving my life. I'm the reason it needed saving." Dominic sat in the armchair across from her, keeping distance, aware of how small she looked in his dead sister's blanket. "The man in your apartment, he was sending a message. To me. Why?" It was time for truth. Dominic had spent 20 years perfecting the art of selective honesty, telling people exactly enough to get what he needed, never more. But Emma deserved the whole story, deserved to understand the danger he'd dragged her into just by noticing she existed. 3 months ago, I saw you outside Rossetti's," he began. "You were carrying boxes, dropping papers. You looked like my sister did before she died, exhausted, desperate, trying to hold everything together with nothing but will. So I helped you. That's all it was supposed to be." Emma nodded slowly. "I remember. You were kind. I'm not kind. I've built my life on being the opposite of kind." Dominic wrapped his hands around his mug, needing the warmth. "But something about you reminded me that I used to be different. Before my sister died, before I decided the only way to survive was to stop caring about anyone outside my circle. What changed? I saw you in court yesterday. Saw Wade, a lawyer I've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, mock you for being poor. Saw him laugh because you couldn't afford representation." Dominic met her eyes, and I realized I'd become the kind of man who enables people like Wade, who profits from crushing people like you. The confession hung between them like smoke. Emma was watching him carefully, and he could see her mind working, connecting pieces. "So you fired him," he said, "and that made someone angry. It made several people angry. I have business arrangements with Prestige Properties, with Wade's firm, with a dozen other companies that depend on me looking the other way while they do whatever it takes to make money. By defending you, by firing Wade, I sent a message that I'm not that person anymore. And someone tried to kill me as punishment. As a warning, to show me what happens when I develop a conscience." Dominic set down his mug. "The man in your apartment wasn't trying to kill you, Emma. He was trying to make me watch you die. Big difference." Emma's face went pale. "Oh God. I have people working on it. We'll find who ordered it and we'll handle it. But in the meantime, you need to stay here. It's off the grid, secure. Marco will have guards rotating shifts." "No." Emma set down her coffee and stood, the blanket falling away. "I'm not doing this. I'm not hiding in some safe house while you fight a mob war over me. I didn't ask for this. You didn't have to ask. I made the choice. Then unmake it." Her voice rose, anger cutting through the fear. "Tell whoever's angry that you don't care about me. Tell them it was a mistake, that I mean nothing to you. Let me go back to my life. They already know I care. There's no taking that back." "Why?" Emma demanded. "Why do you care? You don't know me. We've spoken 3 times. I'm nobody to you." Dominic stood as well, and suddenly they were close enough that he could smell the lavender of her shampoo, see the gold flecks in her storm-gray eyes. "You asked me earlier if I cared what happened to you. I said yes. You want to know why?" "Yes. Because for 3 months I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About the way you fell to your knees in the rain trying to save legal papers that were going to destroy you anyway. About how you thanked me even though you knew who I was, knew what I do. About how you work yourself to exhaustion trying to do everything right in a world that's rigged against you." He paused, the words coming harder now. "And because when I look at you, I see every person I've ever hurt, every victim of my choices, and I can't bring them back, can't undo any of it, but maybe I can save you." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "I don't want to be your redemption. I don't want to be the good deed that makes you feel better about all the bad things you've done. Too late. You already are. The truth of it settled between them like winter frost. Dominic had spent 15 years building walls around himself, and Emma Sinclair had walked through them without even trying, just by being exactly who she was, stubborn and brave and impossibly good. Marco came back inside, his phone dark, his face grim. We need to talk. They moved to the kitchen, leaving Emma in the living room. Marco pulled out his phone and showed Dominic a photo. The man from Emma's apartment, taken by traffic cameras 3 blocks from the scene. He was in his 30s, nondescript, the kind of face you'd forget immediately. His name's Derek Voss, Marco said. Professional, works for a broker out of Detroit, hires out to whoever's paying. But here's the thing, he's expensive. Whoever ordered this spent serious money. Giordano's? That's what I thought. But I called Tony. Woke him up. He swears it wasn't them. Says he's got concerns about your judgment, but ordering hits without talking to you first? That would violate our agreement. Marco rubbed his eyes. I believe him, Dom. Tony's a lot of things, but he doesn't lie to me. Dominic felt ice settle in his stomach. If not the Giordanos, then who? Who else had reason to want Emma dead and Dominic punished? Victoria Chen, he said suddenly. Prestige Properties. I cost them a case, humiliated their lawyer, threatened their business model, and they're connected. I've seen their fundraiser lists. They know people who know people. That's a big jump from real estate developer to hiring killers. Is it? We work with them, Marco. We know what they're willing to do to protect their investments. Remember that tenant organizer in Pilsen who was about to expose their housing violations? Marco's expression darkened. The one who fell down an elevator shaft. That was Prestige. We just helped clean it up afterward. Dominic pulled out his own phone, started scrolling through contacts. If they're willing to kill to protect their reputation, Emma's a threat. She was the catalyst for Morrison's investigation into their discriminatory practices. If that investigation finds what I think it'll find, Prestige loses their operating license in Cook County. So they eliminate the catalyst and send me a message at the same time. Dominic found Victoria Chen's private number, the one she'd given him 3 years ago when they first partnered. I'm calling her. Dom, it's 4 a.m. Good. She'll be off balance. Victoria answered on the 3rd ring, her voice sharp despite the hour. Dominic, I assume you're calling to apologize for yesterday's disaster. Did you order a hit on Emma Sinclair? Silence. Then, I have no idea what you're talking about. Someone tried to throw her out a window tonight. Professional job. And you're the person with the most to lose from her staying alive. Victoria's laugh was cold. If I wanted her dead, she'd be dead. Don't insult me by suggesting I'd hire someone incompetent enough to fail. Besides, why would I risk a murder charge when the eviction case is already won? Morrison recommended dismissal with prejudice and an investigation into Prestige's practices. Recommendations aren't rulings, and investigations can be managed. Emma Sinclair is a nuisance, not a threat. Her voice turned cutting. But you, Dominic? You're becoming a liability. Our board had a meeting this evening. We're severing our partnership effective immediately. Whatever arrangement we had regarding property management and financial services, it's over. Because of the court case? Because you've gone soft. Because you fired Wade over sentimentality. Because you're making decisions based on emotion instead of business sense. Victoria paused. I liked working with you, Dominic. You were ruthless, reliable. But if you're going to start playing white knight for every sad story in Chicago, you're no use to us anymore. Find another way to launder your money. She hung up. Dominic stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, feeling the first domino fall. She denied it? Marco asked. Convincingly. Dominic pocketed his phone. And she just ended our partnership. $3 million a year, gone. Because you saved Emma. Because I changed the rules. Marco leaned against the counter, studying Dominic with an expression that was equal parts concern and resignation. The Giordanos are going to hear about this. Probably already have. And if Prestige is pulling out, other partners might follow. People are going to think you're weak, that you're losing control. In our business, that's the same as painting a target on your back. I know. And you're still doing this? Still protecting her? Dominic thought about Elena, about the promise he'd made at her deathbed that he'd be better, do better, stop letting the world turn him into something she wouldn't recognize. He'd broken that promise for 15 years, but maybe it wasn't too late. Yeah, he said. I'm still doing this. Then we need a plan. Because right now, you're exposed. She's a target, and whoever ordered that hit is still out there. They spent the next hour strategizing, calling in favors, repositioning resources. By the time the sun rose over Oak Park, painting the kitchen in shades of gold and amber, Dominic had a plan that was equal parts desperate and dangerous. He was going to find out who wanted Emma dead, and then he was going to make them regret it so thoroughly that no one would ever threaten her again. But first, he had to survive Friday's meeting with the Giordanos, because if Tony and his brothers decided Dominic was too much of a liability, all the protection and planning in the world wouldn't save him. Or Emma. In the living room, Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, still wrapped in Elena's blanket. Dominic stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, and wondered when he'd become the kind of man who would risk everything for someone he barely knew. Maybe he'd always been that man, underneath the armor. Maybe Elena had seen it, believed in it, even when he couldn't. Outside, the Chicago dawn was cold and beautiful, and full of promises that might all be lies. The Giordano compound occupied 5 acres in River Forest, a suburban fortress disguised as an estate. Dominic drove through the gates Friday evening alone. Marco had wanted to come, but this was something Dominic needed to do without backup. If the Giordanos had decided he was finished, bringing muscle would only accelerate the inevitable. The main house was a sprawling Tudor revival that had cost $12 million to build and another $3 million to secure. Tony Giordano met him at the front door, dressed in casual slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. He was 63, silver-haired, with the kind of face that could shift from grandfatherly warmth to cold calculation in a heartbeat. Dominic. Tony's handshake was firm, his smile not reaching his eyes. Thank you for coming. My brothers are waiting in the study. They walked through the house in silence, past oil paintings and marble sculptures and all the trappings of wealth built on blood and fear. The study was on the 2nd floor, a wood-paneled room lined with books nobody read, dominated by a fireplace where artificial logs burned with perfect regularity. Vincent and Michael Giordano stood when Dominic entered. Vincent was the eldest at 68, the strategist who'd transformed the family business from street rackets to corporate influence. Michael was the youngest at 59, the enforcer whose hands had never been entirely clean, despite 3 decades of expensive lawyers. Dominic. Vincent gestured to a leather chair facing the couch where all 3 brothers sat. Sit. We have concerns. This was how it started. Calm, reasonable, civil. And then, when they'd laid out their case and made their decision, there would be a moment where everything hung in balance. Dominic had been in rooms like this before, had watched men plead and beg and offer everything to buy another day. He'd always wondered what he would do when it was his turn. Now, he'd find out. I understand, Dominic said, sitting. You want to know why I fired Wade, severed ties with Prestige, and put our organization at risk over a woman I barely know. That's the surface question, Vincent said. The deeper question is whether you're still capable of leading your operations, or if you've become a liability we can't afford. Michael leaned forward, his voice harder. You had a girl followed without consulting us. Then when someone tried to hit her, you pulled resources to protect her. You've alienated business partners, fired our lawyer, and made decisions based on what? Sentiment? Guilt? Love, Tony said quietly, and his brothers turned to him. Let's call it what it is. Dom's in love with this Emma Sinclair, or thinks he is, and that's making him sloppy. Dominic wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't love, couldn't be love after 3 conversations and a courthouse moment. But maybe Tony was right. Maybe love didn't need time or logic. Maybe it was just the recognition that another person's existence mattered more than your own survival. I'm not in love with her, Dominic said carefully, but I do care what happens to her. And that's cost me business relationships I valued. It's cost us business relationships, Vincent corrected. We're partners, Dom. Your decisions affect our bottom line. Prestige Properties was worth $3 million a year in clean revenue. Wade handled legal work for 6 of our shell companies. Losing both creates problems we now have to solve. I'll find replacements. That's not the point. Michael stood, paced to the fireplace. The point is trust. We've worked together for 15 years because you were predictable, ruthless, smart, focused on profit. But now, you're making emotional decisions. And in our business, emotion gets people killed. There it was, the implicit threat. Dominic felt it like a blade against his throat. Invisible, but absolutely real. My sister died 15 years ago, Dominic said into the silence, and I decided the only way to survive was to stop caring about anyone outside this life, to become exactly the kind of man you're describing. Ruthless, focused, predictable. He met their eyes one by one. But that man? He's a monster, and I don't want to be him anymore. So you're walking away? Tony asked. I'm trying to find balance, to be effective at what I do without losing what makes me human. That's not possible in our world, Vincent said flatly. You're either all in, or you're a liability. There's no middle ground. Then I'm a liability. The words came easier than Dominic expected, because I'm not throwing Emma to the wolves just to prove I'm still ruthless. And if that costs me your partnership, I understand. The brothers exchanged looks. Some kind of silent communication developed over decades. Then Vincent nodded, and Michael returned to the couch. We're not ending our partnership, Vincent said. Not yet, but we're instituting conditions. Here it came. Dominic braced himself. First, you will resolve the Emma Sinclair situation within 2 weeks. We don't care how. Relocate her, pay her off, protect her, whatever. But she cannot remain a distraction or a vulnerability. Second, you will repair relationships with at least 3 of the partners you've alienated, starting with Prestige if possible. Third, you will bring in new revenue streams to offset what we've lost. Vincent paused. And fourth, you will attend counseling. Dominic blinked. What? You heard me. Counseling. We have a psychologist on retainer. Handles stress management for our people. You'll see her twice a week for 3 months. Vincent's expression was almost amused. You think you're the first person in this business to have a crisis of conscience? It happens. Usually after someone dies or gets arrested. The difference is whether you manage it or let it destroy you. You want me to see a therapist. We want you to process whatever grief or guilt or idealism is making you sloppy. Get your head straight. Figure out how to be both human and effective. Tony leaned forward. Because we need you, Dom. You're brilliant at what you do. But right now, you're compromised. Fix it. It wasn't what Dominic had expected. He'd walked into this meeting prepared for an ultimatum, maybe a bullet. Instead, the Giordanos were offering him a lifeline. Demanding one, really. They wanted him functional, not dead. And Emma? Dominic asked. You'll leave her alone while I'm working this out? We were never targeting her, Vincent said. That wasn't us. But whoever did, they're still out there, and they clearly want to hurt you through her. So yes, protecting her is part of resolving the situation. Just do it quietly. Boss, Michael said suddenly. The hitter from her apartment. We found him. Dominic's entire body tensed. Where? Bottom of the Chicago River. Someone put 3 bullets in him before he went in the water. Professional job. Michael pulled out his phone, showed Dominic a crime scene photo that had clearly been leaked from the police database. Happened sometime Wednesday night, not long after the hit on Emma failed. Someone killed their own hitter? Dominic tried to process the implications. Why? Because he failed, or because he could identify who hired him. Tony stood, walked to the bar, poured 4 glasses of bourbon. Either way, it tells us 2 things. 1, whoever's behind this has serious resources and no hesitation about cleanup. 2, they're willing to kill to keep their identity secret. Which means Emma's still in danger, Dominic said. Which means you have a serious problem to solve. Vincent accepted a glass from Tony. And solving it is condition 0 of our arrangement. Find who ordered the hit. Eliminate the threat. Protect your girl. Do it in the next 2 weeks, or we reconsider everything. They drank together, the 4 of them, partners sealed in bourbon and blood. But Dominic's mind was already racing ahead, connecting pieces. Someone with serious resources. Someone willing to kill to protect their identity. Someone who benefited from Emma's death and Dominic's punishment. Not Prestige. Victoria had been right that she'd hire someone competent, and Voss had failed. Not the Giordanos. They had no reason to lie. So who? His phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Get to the safe house, now. Emma's gone. Dominic was moving before he finished reading. Bourbon forgotten. The Giordanos' voices calling after him. He took the stairs 3 at a time, burst through the front door, and was in his car before Tony caught up. What happened? Tony demanded. Emma's missing. Dominic started the engine, tires screaming on the circular driveway. I have to go. Dominic, wait. But he was already gone, racing through River Forest toward Oak Park, his heart pounding harder than it had in 15 years. He'd left Emma with 2 guards, secure protocols, everything that should have kept her safe. If she was gone, it meant one of two things. She'd left voluntarily, or someone had taken her. Neither option was acceptable. He called Marco, speakerphone crackling to life. What happened? Guards say she went to take a shower around 7. When she didn't come out after 30 minutes, they checked on her. Window was open. She was gone. No signs of struggle, no blood. Just gone. Did she run, or was she taken? Don't know. But Dom, there's something else. We found a note in the bedroom, written on the back of one of her legal documents from the eviction case. Marco paused. It says, if you want to see her alive, stop looking for who hired Voss. Some questions are better left unanswered. Dominic's hands tightened on the wheel. Trace the handwriting. Already did. It's Emma's. So she'd written it under duress, or she'd left it as a clue. Either way, someone had her. Someone who knew about Voss, knew about the investigation, knew exactly how to hurt Dominic in the way that would destroy him most completely. He thought about Emma's storm gray eyes, the way she'd looked at him in the safe house kitchen and asked if she was his redemption. He thought about Elena, about promises made and broken, about the man he'd been before grief turned him into something cold. And he made a choice. Call everyone, Dominic said into the phone. Every contact, every favor owed, every resource we have. I don't care what it costs. We find her tonight. Dom, the note says to back off. I don't care what the note says. We find her, or I burn this entire city down looking. He disconnected, pushed the accelerator harder, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that this was it. The moment where you discovered what kind of man you really were. Not the monster he'd built himself into. Not the saint he could never be. Just a man who'd finally found something worth losing everything for. And God help anyone who stood in his way. The security footage from the Oak Park house took Marco 17 minutes to pull up. And those were the longest 17 minutes of Dominic's life. He stood in the safe house living room. Emma's abandoned coffee mug still on the side table. Elena's blanket crumpled on the couch. Watching Marco work his laptop with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Got it, Marco finally said. Footage from 7:15 to 7:45. They watched in silence. The bedroom, shot from a camera hidden in the smoke detector. Emma entering at 7:16, moving to the window, looking out at the dark street. She stood there for almost 3 minutes, just staring, and Dominic could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she wrapped her arms around herself. Then she pulled out her phone, made a call. Spoke for 6 minutes, her expression shifting from fear to determination to something that looked like resignation. When she hung up, she wrote the note Marco had found, left it on the bed, and climbed out the window onto the fire escape. She'd left voluntarily. No one had taken her. She'd chosen to go. Who did she call? Dominic demanded. Marco was already running the trace. Unknown number. Burner phone. But I can triangulate where the call originated. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Signal came from downtown, near Millennium Park, and wait. He looked up, face pale. Boss, the phone that called her, it pinged off the same tower as your phone. 3 months ago, November 15th, around 9 p.m. Dominic's blood went cold. November 15th, the night he'd helped Emma in the alley outside Rossetti's. Someone had been watching them even then, had been close enough that their phone connected to the same cell tower. Pull up everyone who was at Rossetti's that night, Dominic said. Staff, customers, everyone. Already on it. Marco opened another window, started cross-referencing reservation logs and employee schedules. We had 83 customers that night, 17 staff members, plus delivery people, the wine distributor. Wait, the wine distributor. Who do we use? Castellano Imports. We've used them for 6 years, never a problem. Marco's eyes widened. Oh, Christ. What? Castellano Imports was bought out 8 months ago by a holding company called Meridian Strategic Partners. And Meridian? It's owned by a venture capital firm that has Prestige Properties as its largest client. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Prestige hadn't ordered the hit directly. They'd used a shell company to hire Voss, insulating themselves from the crime. And when Voss failed, they'd killed him and gone after Emma directly, using information gathered over months of surveillance disguised as legitimate business. Victoria Chen lied, Dominic said. She said Emma wasn't a threat, but that was before Morrison's investigation started turning up real evidence. Now, Emma's the witness who can testify about discriminatory practices, the sympathetic victim who could cost Prestige their operating license. They need her gone. And they're using her to control you, Marco added. The note said to stop investigating. They know you're getting close to exposing them. Where would they take her? Dominic was already moving toward the door. Downtown, near Millennium Park. What does Prestige own in that area? Marco pulled up property records. 4 buildings. 2 residential, 1 commercial, 1 under renovation. The renovation's a 12-story office building on Wabash. Been shut down for 3 months while they gut it. He looked up. That's where I'd go if I wanted privacy. They took 2 cars. Dominic and Marco in the first. 4 of Marco's best men in the second. The drive to downtown Chicago took 23 minutes in light traffic, and every second felt like a year. Dominic kept seeing Emma's face in the security footage, the resignation in her expression when she climbed out the window. She thought she was saving him by sacrificing herself. She didn't understand that he was already lost without her. The building on Wabash was dark, surrounded by construction fencing and warning signs. They parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, armed and silent. The front entrance was chained shut, but a side door had been forced open recently. Fresh scratches on the lock. Concrete dust, disturbed. Marco signaled his men to cover the exits while he and Dominic entered. The interior was a gutted shell, walls torn down to bare studs, electrical wires hanging like entrails. Emergency lights provided dim illumination, just enough to navigate by. They moved through the ground floor, clearing rooms, finding nothing. Then, from somewhere above, voices, male, authoritative, and beneath it, softer, Emma, pleading. Dominic took the stairs at a run, Marco right behind him. The voices were coming from the 8th floor. They slowed as they approached, moving carefully, weapons drawn. The 8th floor had been partially renovated into open office space, all exposed ductwork and polished concrete. In the center, under a harsh construction light, Emma sat in a folding chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Blood streaked from a cut above her eye. Victoria Chen stood in front of her, and next to Victoria were 2 men Dominic didn't recognize, private security, judging by their tactical gear and the way they held their weapons. "I'll ask you one more time," Victoria was saying, her voice calm as winter ice. "Did you make copies of any documents from the eviction case? Did you give anything to Judge Morrison that wasn't submitted in court?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Emma said, her voice shaking but defiant. "The judge had everything from my file. I don't believe you. Morrison's investigation has evidence we never submitted, which means someone gave it to her. And you're the only person who had access to our internal communications." I don't even know what evidence you mean." Victoria slapped her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty space. Emma's head snapped to the side, and Dominic felt something inside him break open, something dark and violent that he'd kept leashed for 15 years. He stepped out of the stairwell, gun raised. Step away from her. Everyone spun. Victoria's face went through shock, anger, and calculation in rapid succession. Her security guards raised their weapons, but Marco had already emerged behind Dominic, and now they were in a standoff. Guns pointed, fingers on triggers. Everyone one bad decision away from a bloodbath. Dominic. Victoria recovered her composure like pulling on armor. "I should have known you'd find us. You always were thorough. You tried to kill her. You hired Voss, and when he failed, you killed him to cover your tracks. I did what I had to do." Emma Sinclair became a problem when Morrison used her case to open an investigation. That investigation has already cost us $6 million in lost contracts and suspended projects. If it continues, we lose our Cook County license. We lose everything. So you decided to eliminate the witness. I decided to protect my business. Don't pretend you wouldn't do the same. Victoria gestured to Emma. She's sitting on evidence that could destroy Prestige. Documents someone leaked to her, internal emails, tenant complaints, payoff records. Morrison doesn't have them yet, but Emma knows where they are. Once I get that information, she becomes irrelevant. "I don't have any documents," Emma shouted. "I don't know what you're talking about," but Dominic did. Suddenly, with crystalline clarity, he understood. The papers Emma had been carrying that night in November, the ones that had spilled into the puddle, they hadn't all been eviction notices. There had been other documents mixed in, papers with the Prestige Properties letterhead that Emma probably hadn't even noticed in her panic to collect everything. Someone inside Prestige had tried to leak evidence using Emma as an unwitting courier. Maybe someone with a conscience or a grudge, or just a sense that what Victoria was doing crossed a line. And when Emma dropped those papers, when Dominic helped her collect them, some of those documents had ended up in her possession. She doesn't know she has them, Dominic said. They were mixed with her eviction papers. She probably took them home, filed them away, never looked at them twice. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Where? Safe place. Insurance against exactly this kind of situation. Dominic lied smoothly, buying time. You let her go. I'll tell you where to find them. Or I torture her until she tells me herself, then kill you both. You could try. Dominic's voice dropped to something deadly. But my people know I'm here. If I don't call Marco's backup in 10 minutes, 20 armed men flood this building. You'll be dead before you reach the stairs. It was a bluff. Marco's backup was the 4 men covering the exits, not 20. But Victoria didn't know that. Couldn't afford to gamble if there was even a chance Dominic was telling the truth. Stalemate, Victoria said. Not quite. Dominic lowered his gun slightly, a gesture of de-escalation. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let Emma go. I'm going to retrieve the documents and destroy them. Not give them to you, destroy them. So neither of us can use them. And then we go our separate ways. You handle Morrison's investigation however you want, but you leave Emma alone. And if I refuse, then people start dying. Maybe you first. Maybe your security. Maybe me. But definitely some people. In this room tonight. Is that really what you want? He could see her calculating, weighing options. Victoria Chen was a predator, but she was also a businesswoman. Violence was messy, expensive, risky. If there was a way to walk away clean, she'd take it. The documents, Victoria said finally. Where are they? Emma's apartment, in a box under her bed, mixed with old textbooks and tax returns. She never looked at them, never knew what she had. Dominic met Emma's eyes across the room, trying to communicate trust, asking her to believe him. I'm telling the truth, Victoria. Let her go. And this ends quietly. Victoria considered for a long moment. Then she nodded to her security. Cut her loose. One of the guards moved forward with a knife, sliced through Emma's zip ties. She stood on shaking legs, her face pale, blood still drying on her temple. She started toward Dominic, but Victoria caught her arm. If those documents surface anywhere, police, press, Morrison's office, I will find you and finish this. Do you understand? Emma nodded mutely. Say it. I understand. Victoria released her, and Emma ran to Dominic, collapsed against his chest. He wrapped one arm around her, keeping his gun trained on Victoria with the other. Marco, Dominic said quietly. Get her out of here. Boss, get her out. Now. Marco understood. He holstered his weapon and put a hand on Emma's shoulder. Come on. My car's 2 blocks away. Emma pulled back, looking up at Dominic with storm-gray eyes full of fear and understanding. Don't do anything stupid. He smiled, probably the first genuine smile he'd given anyone except her in 15 years. Stupid's all I've got left. She let Marco guide her toward the stairwell. Dominic waited until he heard their footsteps descending, waited until he was sure Emma was far enough away that she wouldn't hear what came next. Then he raised his gun again. You made a mistake, Victoria. You should have taken my deal. Her face went white. You said, I lied. There are no documents. Emma doesn't have anything. But you? He smiled, cold as death. You just confessed to attempted murder, conspiracy, and ordering a hit on Derek Voss. And I recorded every word. He pulled out his phone with his free hand, showed her the recording app running for the past 8 minutes. Victoria's face transformed from fear to rage. You can't use that. It's inadmissible. In court, sure. But Morrison doesn't need a court to open an investigation. And once she hears this, once she knows what you did to Emma, you think your lawyers can make that disappear? Dominic pocketed the phone. It's over, Victoria. You lost. She lunged for him, stupid, desperate, and one of her security guards raised his weapon. Dominic fired first, 3 shots center mass, professional and clean. The guard dropped. The second guard was smarter. He threw down his weapon and raised his hands. Victoria froze, staring at the body, at Dominic, at the future collapsing around her. Here's what happens now, Dominic said quietly. You're going to turn yourself in. You're going to confess to everything. Voss, the attempted hit on Emma, the housing discrimination, all of it. And you're going to make sure every person who worked with you on this goes down too. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I send this recording to every news outlet in Chicago. Your face will be on every channel, your name synonymous with corruption and murder. Your company will be destroyed, your reputation obliterated. But if you confess, cooperate, maybe you serve 10 years instead of life. Maybe you get out while you're still young enough to rebuild. He was offering her the same choice she'd denied Emma, mercy wrapped in consequences. Victoria understood. She nodded slowly, something breaking behind her eyes. I'll confess. Smart choice. Dominic gestured to the remaining security guard. Get her out of here, and tell whoever pays you that Dominic Caruso says this is finished. They left, Victoria's heels clicking on concrete, the guard's hand on her elbow like she was already under arrest. Dominic stood alone in the empty 8th floor, listening to sirens approaching in the distance. Marco must have called the police once Emma was safe. He looked down at the body of the security guard, felt nothing. There should have been guilt, regret, something. But all he felt was tired, and glad that Emma was safe, and aware that he'd just crossed another line he could never uncross. His phone rang. Morrison. Dominic, the judge said without preamble. Marco just played me a recording that's going to change everything. Are you safe? Safe enough. Emma? With Marco, heading to my house. She'll stay with me tonight while we process Victoria's arrest. Morrison paused. You did the right thing. It's going to cost you. Recording someone without consent, even in Illinois where it's legal, is going to make certain people very nervous about working with you, but you saved her life. That's all that matters. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, you just blew up your entire operation to protect one woman. The Giordanos are going to have questions. Your partners are going to have doubts. You might have saved Emma, but you've painted a target on your own back. Then I'll deal with it. Alone? Dominic thought about that. About 20 years of dealing with everything alone, of building walls and keeping distance and never letting anyone close enough to hurt him. It had kept him alive and powerful and utterly empty. No, he said finally. Not alone. Not anymore. Morrison's laugh was soft, approving. Good, because Emma Sinclair is asking for you, and I think you'd better get down here before she storms out of my house to find you herself. Girl's got more courage than sense. Yeah, I noticed. He ended the call, holstered his weapon, and walked toward the stairs. Police lights were painting the building's exterior in red and blue, and he could hear boots on concrete as cops flooded the lower floors. But Dominic wasn't worried. Morrison would handle the official story, would make sure his name stayed out of the reports, would protect him the same way he'd protected Emma, because that's what people did when they cared about each other. They took risks. They made sacrifices. They showed up. Outside, the Chicago night was cold and clear, stars visible for once between the city's light pollution. Dominic stood on the sidewalk and tilted his face to the sky, breathing free air, feeling something like hope. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Are you okay? He typed back. On my way. And for the first time in 15 years, Dominic Caruso walked away from a crime scene not toward power or profit, or the next move in an endless game, but toward something infinitely more terrifying and valuable. A future where he got to be human again, where he got to protect instead of destroy, where maybe, just maybe, he got to keep Emma Sinclair in his life and find out what kind of man he could become if someone believed in him the way Elena once had. The sirens wailed behind him, but Dominic kept walking, toward Judge Morrison's house in Hyde Park, toward Emma's storm-gray eyes and fierce courage, toward whatever came next. And he didn't look back. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about Dominic and Emma's journey, and what part of the world you're listening from. Your support means everything.